Okay, hello there. I am coming to you live from my classroom this Monday afternoon. So, today we are going to cover two topics. Topic number one is going to be the Great Depression. Topic number two is going to be the New Deal. So this is the 1930s that we are in. We finished the 20s, now we're on to the 30s. Everything was, oh my goodness, everything's so great in the roaring 20s. To suddenly, everybody's poor. Now, in English classes, you've probably read some books from this era, Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, so on and so forth. This is going to take us all the way to pretty much the start of World War II. World War II will simply be one short lecture. I'm not going to talk at all about the actual war itself, really, because that is beyond the scope. You'll never need to know about the Battle of the Bulge, or D-Day, or what kamikaze pilots are on the AP exam. It's just not what the AP is about. So, anywho, let us begin. Let's talk about the Great Depression. So, what the heck is it? Well, number one, the Roaring 20s are utterly over. Things are looking awful. It is a bad time to be anybody, really, unless you're really rich. So, following the end of the 20s, the country is going to plunge into a brutal economic disaster, the worst economic point in American history. So far, kids, so far. So nobody's got work, nobody has their homes anymore. It is awful. It'll only end with the coming of World War II. Here's the thing, and why it's kind of hard to explain. There's not one single thing that went into it. There was a whole heck of a lot of stuff that caused the Great Depression. So, we're not in class, so we can't jigsaw reading it. However, I'm going to summarize these points. We've got five main problems. Industry, farming, consumer spending and credit, so think credit cards, everybody, like uneven income, and the stock market. I know I'm just repeating what's on there. However, here's what you need to remember. So for key industries, think West Virginia. West Virginia was coal country. So huge portions of the United States rely on lumber harvesting trees, and coal. Like Maine, lumber was the huge industry. Now, these industries, which employ huge chunks of the population in these areas, are declining. It's drying up. The coal is drying up. We don't need that much coal. We don't need all that lumber. It is moving away. So we're running out. Additionally, farming, which if you remember with the agricultural revolution on the Great Plains basically turn into a giant farm. Farmers on those plains are struggling. Here's a big problem, is that prices for crops, let's say Frank is growing corn. Frank is only able to sell their corn for 50 cents a bushel, maybe, in 1929. And then in 1930, they can only sell that corn for 10 cents a bushel. So in order to make up for that, Frank grows more corn. But then all that corn is flooding the market, which just makes prices go down even further. And then on top of that, you've got the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl is when all of this bad farming practices on the plains are causing the topsoil to erode and become really unhealthy. So when there's big climactic event and a bunch of winds, it literally strips the soil off of the Great Plains, and it causes a giant continent-spanning dust storm. Now, of course, everybody is using way too much on their credit, buying what they don't have. Credit and credit cards are a new thing. Nobody knows how to properly behave. So people rack up huge amounts of debt. Additionally, is the stock market. So a stock is a percentage of a company. Think of it like a piece of a pie. So let's say it's a lot like, actually, I've explained this before because we've done Shark Tank. I don't need to talk about any of that. Anywho, you can read the rest of these that are on here. Last thing I'll say are tariffs. So a tariff is a tax that is paid on a good from another country that's coming in. So common misconception, it's not like paid by the, like let's say Hallie wants to import Japanese cars, and there's a tariff on Japanese cars. The car company Hallie is buying from isn't paying a tax. Hallie is paying a tax. So what then is going to happen is that Hallie is going to then charge more money to the American people. Tariffs are a tool which in theory are supposed to convince people to not trade with certain countries and to trade with other countries or to have more homegrown products. What ended up happening post-World War I is all sorts of different countries, Europe and America especially, were having like almost a tariff war, where they kept on charging each other different reciprocal tariffs in order to try to build up their own industries. But the problem with that was that all of these tariffs, then, when the American economy collapsed, there was nobody else they could turn to offset some of the problems. Anyways, we're not getting into huge detail here. But what happened? So, October 29th, 1929, it becomes known as Black Tuesday. There's a, quote, run on the banks. So the stock market, where everybody, like, think Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street, it crashes. Big red line all the way down. Why is it crashing? Well, here's the thing. There's all these different stocks are being bought on inflated values. So if you're a stock trader, then you're going to go to somebody who wants to buy a stock. Let's say in Mallory's Shoe Company. So you say, hey, I'll stock in Mallory's Shoe Company. And if you're the trader, you're going to lie and say it's worth $100 a stock, when really it's only worth $50 a stock. So when that guy who just bought it, maybe it's Zen, goes to sell it, suddenly he's out $50, and it's scary. So there's like this huge like domino effect where a couple people do that, and then it's like, oh my gosh, and then like it spreads and spreads and spreads like wildfire. And on that day, the stock market just plummets. People see that, panic, go to sell their stock. They have no money from those stocks because they bought them on inflated values. So then they go to the banks to take all their money out of the banks. Now here's the problem. Banks at this time are not insured by the federal government. Nowadays, every dollar you put into a bank, up to like $200,000, the federal government will give you that money if your bank closes for whatever reason. Because banks don't just keep your money in the bank. They loan it to people. They buy stocks of their own. This is how banks make money. So all these people are rushing to the banks, trying to withdraw all their cash. The banks don't have all that cash on hand because they've been investing it, spending it, buying all these inflated stocks. So suddenly, all these banks are shutting down. So it's this huge panic. And by just a couple of months, billions, $30 billion are just poof, wiped out, gone. It's the start of the Great Depression. So this is a famous photo. This guy right here is really wealthy, and he is selling his brand new car for $100. As it says on the sign, $100 will buy this car, must have cash, lost it all on the stock market. And he is not a happy camper, let me tell you that. These are people at a bank. They are rushing to withdraw all of their money, as you can tell. I mean, that guy, though, he looks like he's having a great time. But the tellers are not having a great time because they simply don't have all the money that these people are demanding. It's their money, but there's no insurance on it. And then, of course, here's a chart showing you the unemployment rate during the Great Depression. As you can see, it spikes in the early 1930s with almost 1 out of every 4 grown adults not being able to find a job until it goes down into World War II. So, around the world, things are also really bad. So, every country in the world is affected in some way by the Great Depression. Now, there is no country that is affected more than Germany. Germany gets impacted really, really negatively by the Great Depression. Now, if you recall, Germany's economy had been really hamstringed by the Treaty of Versailles. There's already lots of inflation. Inflation, in case you don't know, is when the price of currency and the price of goods increases year after year. So, for example, in 2001, the year I was born, let's pretend and say you could buy, no, let's not pretend. Let's say you could buy a Subway sandwich, a foot long, for $5. $5 foot long. I remember those commercials. Nowadays, it's like 12 something dollars to buy a foot long. Same product, same ingredients. The price has simply inflated. So everybody gets knocked out by this, but Germany is hurt, let me get that out of the way, really badly. So if you look here, for example, unemployment rate in America, it goes up 600%. In Germany, it goes up the most out of any of these other European countries. Their trade goes down the most. Their production goes down the most. Wholesale prices means prices of groceries and whatnot. Everything is awful. Keep this in mind when we talk about the rise of fascism. These are some famous photos out of Germany. This is a woman literally making a dress out of Reichsmarks, the German dollar, because they're so useless. They're not even worth the paper they're printed on. This guy is using money as his wallpaper, and these are little kids using giant stacks of German dollar bills, Reichsmarks again, to play with them like they're blocks. It was such worthless currency. The inflation was so high. Like, you couldn't even buy a loaf of bread with this. It was crazy. So, who's in charge? Well, we got good old Herbert Hoover, namesake of the Hoover Dam out by Las Vegas. So, President Hoover is in charge. President Hoover is a Republican president, and here's the thing. Initially, Hoover ignores it. He says, it's not a big deal. People are freaking out for no reason. What's the issue? Finally, in the early 30s, he does, late 20s, early 30s, he does acknowledge the problem. But Herbert Hoover firmly believes that it is not the role of the government to intervene in the economy. He believes in small government. He thinks that the government should not be going around ending it. The free market will sort itself out. He's a staunch capitalist. He loved the robber barons. So here's how he's going to fix it. He goes, hey, American people, I see you're suffering. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Number one, I'm going to cut the taxes for the rich people. If the business owners and the rich people pay less in taxes, they are going to provide jobs for other people. This is trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics does not work. It doesn't work. Don't let anybody ever tell you trickle-down economics works. That's not even a political statement by me. That is an economic statement of fact as a historian. Additionally, he literally just asked people to stay open. No joke. These businesses, which if you saw that, like those numbers, how badly they're being hit, he literally just says, please stay open. It's your patriotic duty to employ people. And then a tactic is tried and true, and as American as an apple pie, he blames the Mexicans. He says, gosh darn it, all these Mexican farm workers who we asked to come here in World War I to work on the farms when we were fighting the Germans, gosh dang it, it's their fault. We need to kick them out. Guess what, guys? That didn't work. All right? So it was not, in fact, the Mexicans' fault. But as always, we blame minorities. So here's the thing. Herbert Hoover, even though he got elected, so he was popular, he quickly becomes blamed. He becomes one of the most unpopular presidents of all time at the end of his term. So these, if you see on the right, this picture, this is called a shanty town. A shanty town is where homeless people go and construct their own dwellings. And these shanty towns, which pop up all over the country because nobody has a job, so they lose their homes, get nicknamed Hoovervilles after Herbert Hoover. In case you couldn't have guessed it, this is not a, oh my gosh, I love Herbert Hoover. This is a derogatory nickname, basically blaming him for what that is. It'd be like if we called in 2015 when Barack Obama was president, if we called homeless encampments Obamavilles. All right. So notice how I went back to presidents, so I couldn't be seen as making a political statement either way. Just how smart I am, guys. These are more pictures of these so-called Hoovervilles. As you can see, I know we can't, it's hard to judge, but I just want to point this out. So if we think of a stereotypical homeless person today, we don't often think of somebody who is well-dressed. Like, let's just be frank about it, guys. We think of somebody who does not look very well-to-do, so to speak. if you look at this picture, you see a guy. I mean, I understand fashion is what it was back then, but he's got his collared shirt on, his belt, he's got his pressed khakis, his work shoes. Like, this is not a guy who is, like a meth addict, for example. You know how it is. You get what I'm trying to get at here, kids. Anywho's, that's it for the Great Depression. So, like I said, we're cruising on through. Let's now talk and meet one of America's greatest presidents of all time, although he does have a big caveat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. So he is the cousin of the older Teddy Roosevelt, another one of America's most famous presidents. So FDR is this man in the picture here. FDR has the opposite beliefs of Herbert Hoover. So in 1932, Herbert Hoover is the Republican candidate, and FDR is the Democratic candidate. So FDR, as opposed to Hoover, firmly believes that it is the job of the government to regulate the economy, in that it is the job of the government to help the average American during the Great Depression directly. FDR believes in a big government. Herbert Hoover believes in a small government. Just something to keep in mind. Herbert Hoover, small government. FDR, big, expansive government. So FDR will win the election of 1932 quite handedly. Now, once he's in office, FDR has a vision. It's his 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. FDR is going to relieve the plight of the working people. He is going to directly help. So those who are sick, those who are homeless, those who have no jobs, those who are starving, he is going to directly help them. Be it money, be it programs, whatever it is, he's going to ease the suffering. So right now he's treating the symptoms, let's say. If we think of it like a disease, he's giving somebody morphine for their pain. Next up is recovery. And if he's already given somebody morphine for their pain, he's now going to give them antibiotics to fix the infection. He wants to get the economy, after he's eased the suffering, he wants to get the economy back to what it was. The final R is reform. So think of reform like physical therapy. So he is going to try to make sure something like this never happens again. He's going to fix all of the wrongs that caused it to happen in the first place. He calls this his New Deal, the New Deal for the American people, hence the name The New Deal. So, what the heck is the New Deal going to do? Like I said, it is going to be all of these different programs which are going to address one of his 3 R's. These are some of the most famous of them. One of the most famous being the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. I can almost guarantee all the young men in our class would be working for the CCC, or at least one of these. We'll talk about Social Security later, but the Civil Works Administration, they built the first paved roads in this community during this time. And he does a lot of work. I mean, I'd love to get into detail with this with you, but we can't. But just if you ever feel the need to quote some of these programs during a DBQ or an LEQ or an SAQ, I would recommend either quoting the CCC or Social Security. The CCC puts people to work. It's like government jobs, giving them money. And the Social Security is Social Security. This is when somebody retires or can't work, the government gives them a paycheck. First time that ever happened. Anyways, so key things to remember. FDR is, for the first time, massively moving the way Americans view government. FDR is using the federal government, this thing which Americans have traditionally been so fearful of giving power to. He is going to use it to directly help the American people. And what that means, though, is that the scale of the government is going to rapidly blossom. You're going to have more workers. The government's going to have more power. The government's going to need more money. It's going to have a bigger budget. Everything about the federal government is going to rapidly expand in ways almost thought unimaginable. And it is never going to go back. The reason we have such a huge apparatus of federal government today can be traced directly to the Great Depression. So forever, the federal government will be expanded. Remember that. FDR expands the federal government, moves away from small government. It will never, ever, ever go back. Unless, of course, it does. But it has not gone back yet. So I will also just mention the Works Progress Administration. A lot like the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, they put people to work. So let's say my name is Tim Walker, and I don't have a job because nobody does in the Great Depression. So I'm Tim Walker. I go downtown. I go to the Works Progress Administration, the WPA office. I say, hey, I'm a strapping young lad. I need a job. They're going to say, sure thing, champ. Come on in. So what they do is they'll take these young people, men and women, but mostly men. A lot of women do work in the Civilian Conservation Corps, though. The WPA will do things like building roads, building bridges. They'll build sewers. They'll build airports. They'll build electrical wires. They get paid very low. It's like $1, like not even $1 a day, like very low pay. However, the young people are getting skills that they can then use to get a private sector job. They are getting a paycheck. They are getting fed. They're getting clothed, and they're getting housing. So it's almost like the military in a way, where you're getting all your basic necessities provided for you by the government in exchange for your services, and they'll send you wherever they want to send you. Now, the CCC does the same thing, but the CCC works a lot more in the outdoors. So the CCC will fix up beaches. They will cut trails through the wilderness. They will fix up national parks. Like if you ever climbed Katahdin, all the trails on Katahdin were trailblazed by the CCC. All right. Again, we are not going to spend any time here. If you want to take a stop and look at these, you're welcome to. These are just other administrations, and it's a whole lot of triple letter things. But if you want to take a look, you're welcome to. These are just other things that were being done during the New Deal. Anywho's, 2 reasons people didn't like it. Number 1, if you are a socialist, you say this isn't going far enough. If you are a conservative on the right, you don't like this. Obviously, you think like this guy right here, Huey Long, hated the New Deal. Huey Long said this was awful, it was the worst thing ever, and that FDR was a tyrant. And that whole concept where you might hear somebody say today, I'm okay with unemployment or disability pay or whatever it is, but I don't want people abusing the system. It's that same argument back in the 30s. People are saying, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be helping, we shouldn't be giving handouts, so to speak, to poor people. We should be encouraging them to pick themselves up, so on and so forth. To speak to the point of Huey Long, the deficit did rise to $3.5 billion over the span of 3 years. So if we look, $1.3 billion, a deficit is when let's say the federal government spends $20 billion, but they only made $19 billion. They have a deficit of $1 billion. The deficit triples. The deficit, which had taken since 1776 to get to $1.3 billion, in the span of 3 years, it triples. This is part of the start of the massively expanding federal debt. Our government is, I think, $16 trillion in debt, or some stupidly high number like that. It's insane. Last thing, or almost last thing I will note. So I've mentioned many times the quote-unquote party switch. That is going to come up later, but we're starting to see it happen during the Great Depression. So during the New Deal, if we see this map of the election of 1928, we see everywhere but the Deep South is voting Republican and the Deep South is voting Democrat. 40 years later, everywhere is voting Democrat and the Deep South is voting Republican. What you're going to see is a changing where groups such as white evangelicals who used to identify with the Democratic Party begin to identify with the Republican Party and vice versa. Now, minority groups, especially African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, start at this point in time to shift and say, you know what, the Democratic Party is the party of choice for me. They feel more represented by it. And white evangelicals start to feel more represented by the Republican Party at this point. Now, we're going to go into much more detail about the party switch, why it happened, how it happened. Some people don't even think it's real, but that's just simply not historically accurate. It happened, as evidenced by simple reality of the election of 1928 and the election of 1964 and all the other elections that have happened since. Anyways. I'm not going to spend any time here. If you want to pause, you can look at it. I already talked about Social Security. So we already talked about this. Just again, to wrap up, if you need to pause, you are welcome to pause and take a look at this. However, just know the New Deal effectively by 1939 has ended the Great Depression. It won't truly end until World War II. War is good for business, believe it or not. But it does do a huge amount. It takes us 90% of the way there. Now, long term, the huge thing to remember is that the federal government is growing massively in size. The government becomes the biggest employer in the country. The government is now directly giving money and helping people who need it, such as the elderly, disabled, people who are unemployed. The government is controlling so many different sectors of your life now. So we're just off the back of prohibition. So think not like the government controls the economy. The government is controlling all sorts of different aspects. Everything is controlled by the federal government. Like I said, again, just our key points. I really want to hammer this home. FDR will forever change the face of the federal government. It will become so much more deeply intertwined, not just in business, but in daily life. So, 1939, the Depression's over. But what we're going to discover next class is that while we have been panicking and focusing only on ourselves during the Great Depression and being neutral and isolationist, things have been happening around the world, especially in Europe. I wonder what's been going on in Europe. We are going to find out next time on the Drogi Show. So, hope that was helpful. Please give this a watch. I will chat with you later. Goodbye. So long. Sayonara.